Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Friday at 10:46. Hope everyone's doing good. I This week I went to Opera House Video, the only and one of my favorite places to support. They are the only video shop here in Maine that I know of that still exists. And I long, super long history with that place, and I've done lots of collaborations with them. I've been great friends with Dennis Howard for a long time. I've actually played a couple of gigs there this summer with Quantum, but long rich history. But to be honest, I haven't been there or going there as much as I used to in the past, just because I really got into collecting movies this past. Well, it's that part of it's not new. I've been buying movies ever since. Well, really ever since it's been probably 20 years or so now. But ever since DVDs really exploded, maybe more than 20 years. But I started buying DVDs. When I got out of college, about 7 or 8 years after college, I started buying lots of DVDs. That's kind of where it started. But I would buy them pretty, infrequently, and in my travels and all those things. But it was probably about 3 or 4 years ago. Um, I started getting pretty serious about buying movies, and that whole thing has taken on a whole new thing for me, where it's kind of a fun obsession. Really, it really is. It's kind of a thing now where it's a regular thing that I do, and so now I buy movies all the time. So one of the reasons I just don't go there as much is I have a ton of movies that I usually always have to get to that I bought, and to be honest, I have been pretty disenfranchised this year with new releases and new movies. It I realize it always has an ebb and flow, and I sometimes think, well, it's not. Is it because of my taste? My tastes have changed, and I've gotten more selective or more exclusive about things. Is that the reason I see less movies in the theater, or is that the reason I see less movies on DVD like I used to? Back in the day, I would go to, up until a couple of years ago, I used to go to Opera House Video every week and rent a ton of movies. But definitely back then, I was not buying the amount of movies that I buy now, and I was doing it every few months. Now it's a regular thing. But so it's either that could be the reason. I've gotten more particular. I've gotten more selective. My tastes have gotten a little bit more regimented. That's the reason, maybe, why. Or it's something I've kind of suspected for a while. Maybe I don't want to admit to it, but or it's the other side of the coin, of where the quality has just been not as great. Things have been getting more and more diminished, to a degree. So I think for me, like, my tastes, I think my tastes are the same. I don't really feel like my tastes have changed that much over the years. Um, I think in some ways I've kind of loosened up a little bit more about what I like. I I mean, for me, usually, I when it comes to the genre that I love, which is the horror exploitation world, you can take the worst movie ever, but for me, if it's got really good kills, but if especially if it's got really good kills, that's a real big plus. But if the movie can be terrible, it can be terribly directed and just all around. But if it has this atmosphere to it, to where it's kind of this world building thing, and you feel like you're really being put into this particular world, and you can kind of taste it. That's like a different thing for me, and usually that's the thing I enjoy the most about films, and that's the thing that makes me remember the film or want to go back to the film. And of course, all those other things are great to have. You know, great direction, great story, great acting, great cinematography, great music, of course. But if the movie has really good atmosphere, I will probably love that movie. And I have found that more particularly in the world of the exploitation film, that I've found myself kind of digging movies that I probably would have hated years ago because it didn't have all of those things that I mentioned, and I just kind of dismissed it. But now it's like I kind of like that balance sometimes with a lot of films. And so, in that regard, I kind of feel like my tastes have kind of, or my, I guess to a degree, my requirements for a good experience around a movie has kind of has opened up, or it's a little bit more of a laid back kind of approach, if that makes any sense. And that to me, that's the biggest selling point. If a movie has good atmosphere and I'm transported for those 2 hours and I'm kind of invested in it and I'm lost in that world, I don't really require all that much, you know. Obviously, all those other things are tremendously important, but and so I don't think it's that. I think it's because it's been harder to see new releases because of streaming. A lot of movies don't get released as much. There are, and I just feel like there has been a lot of problems with newer films. But I did recently release or buy. I did recently go to Opera House Video, and I rented three new movies that I had not seen, and one that a couple of them I heard pretty positive things about. And out of the three movies, I have to say two of them were good, and one was really, really good. And I was really surprised. I didn't know much about it. I heard mostly good things, somewhat mixed things about it, but I actually really liked it. And again, one of the things that I say for me that usually gives me more of an indication if I had a good experience around a movie is if I wake up the next day and I'm talking about it. Maybe I talk to a friend about it, or I'm thinking about it, and it stays with me. And I kind of crave to. I start getting this craving that I want to see it again. So that's kind of the case with this movie. So last night I watched a movie that again I had heard little things about, and that it was good. It was a pretty good slasher movie, and then I also heard some negative things about it. And but what I watched last night, In a Violent Nature, it came out this year. It was directed by Chris Nash. And the thing that I was surprised about, this movie was a Shudder production. I'm not really a huge fan of Shudder. I think Shudder, it's like twofold for me. I think Shudder does a great service for horror fans. They show it's a streaming service, but they show all kinds of horror films. Obviously, a lot of newer ones, but seem, from what I know about it and from what I've heard about Shudder, because I don't do any streaming, they show a lot of older films, a lot of older, horror films, slasher movies, and low budget and indie films. They do kind of showcase indie horror films in general, which I think is awesome. And Joe Bob Briggs has, I believe, his show on there, who is, the iconic legend in the world of horror and exploitation. So it's got a lot of great things, a lot of great and wonderful attributes to it. The thing, which has been a trend for a lot of these streaming companies, is now a lot of these companies, Hulu and Netflix, of course, Disney Plus, they they start out as companies where they were streaming films, and you pay for the service as a consumer. And about a few years back, they started to, obviously they were very successful at what they were doing, but then they moved into creating their own productions, creating their own content. Like Hulu really did that big time with Prey, the Predator sequel, which is a really great film. There was a Hellraiser remake that was done. It's a pretty good movie. And a slew of other movies, all kinds of television shows. Shudder also started doing that a few years back, probably like 2 or 3 years ago, and they started doing lots of original horror films, essentially, and I think a few TV shows. And I saw a few of them when they were coming out. They were getting a quick release as far as DVD and Blu-ray. So I saw quite a few of them through Opera House Video, and to be honest, I was not really happy with. I didn't really like any of them. I thought um, I love low budget films, and I felt like this was the case of where a lot of these films were very low budget, but it just wasn't. It just didn't deliver the goods. They were trying too hard. The stories never seemed really strong, and I I just felt they were just kind of bland. They were okay, but nothing that I saw that Shudder had put out as far as original films was anything that I was, into. So this film, A Violent Nature, I rented it and I started watching it and did not realize or did not know that it was a Shudder production, Shudder original. So I was like, oh, I was well, to be honest, I was a little bit bummed out by that, and I was kind of not so excited. But I started watching the film, and it was interesting because right away I kind of got this vibe that this was well, essentially a Friday 13th movie, and the main character looked exactly like, I felt, well, at least had the presence of Jason Voorhees. Um, and I'm like, okay, this is totally going to be a rip off of Friday 13th, with which can be cool, which is fine. There's a million movies that have done that and have done pretty well with that, and also a million movies that have not been so successful with that. But I was open to it. I was like, okay, cool, I'll watch it. Started watching it, and I found myself really digging this movie. It's really surprising. Uh, I've kind of had this. I've seen this movie described as one part art house film, one part slasher film, and it sounds a little funny and a little bit, I don't know, maybe pretentious or goofy. But I kind of feel it's kind of accurate. The thing that's so interesting about this movie and so unique, um, it's definitely a slasher movie. The kills in this movie are just so incredibly brutal. But the thing that I like about this movie that I thought was really, really unique, on one hand, it's like a carbon copy of the Friday 13th movies. But the thing that's really unique and really different about this movie is the way it's shot. And usually, typically in slasher movies, it's about the kind of the suspense. You don't see the killer. It's the jump scares, if you will, the boogeyman under the bed, the boogeyman in the closet. And you got the teenage, um, or you have the young people, girls and boys getting picked off and killed one by one, and there's a high body count with creative kills, and usually cool atmosphere. It takes place in a cabin or by a lake or in some creepy house. That's the typical kind of template for slasher films. But this film does something different where it holds the perspective of the killer the entire time. Like literally, the killer is in the film the entire time, and the way the camera is in relation to him is you're literally seeing everything from his perspective. There are these incredibly long scenes of him just kind of walking through the woods, and the camera is almost feels like it's mounted on his back, or you're getting his from his bird's eye view, and there are all these scenes of where he's walking through the woods, and approaching his victims. So it's very interesting. It's a whole different kind of perspective. Definitely, that perspective is something I have to say I've never seen a movie shot that way, especially in a more genre specific film like the slasher genre, which is my all time favorite kind of style. So uh, it creates a very different vibe that we that I've never seen in a slasher film, because it is on paper it's very straightforward, and it is that typical kind of template for a slasher film, but it's got these qualities to it that give it something very, very, very unique and very, very different. And I woke up with this feeling of, wow, when I rented it, I saw it on DVD, and I woke up with the feeling now where I really, really want to buy it on Blu-ray, because it's really beautifully shot. The nature aspect, the woods, the forest is such a part of this movie. And so it's an interesting. The other thing that's interesting about this movie is kind of this weird, not weird, but interesting, cool juxtaposition of where it's a slasher movie and the kills are just incredibly brutal, and it is there is that kind of atmosphere throughout the entire movie, but it's beautifully shot. The cinematography for this movie is kind of incredible. And the other thing that's interesting about this movie is that what you typically see in slasher movies is, most of the kills happen at like sunset or at nighttime. A lot of the kills in this movie happen during the day and in the broad daylight, which is a totally different thing which we've never seen. And the killer uses the coverage of the dense forest to kind of hide his methods. And so that perspective of it is very different. The other thing that is I actually really, really liked is there's a scene where these campers, these kids that are at this cabin, are talking, and they kind of bring up and explain kind of the origins of who this supposed killer is, this kind of urban legend. And it's a scene of where they are all the characters are sitting around this big campfire, and the camera work for that scene is kind of amazing. Like, it's like this round robin thing, and the camera is kind of following them around the entire time. It kind of makes me think of, like, one of the things that I love about, say, a movie like, say, Reservoir Dogs, Quentin Tarantino, his debut, of course. One of the things that's so cool about that movie is kind of the scene of it's all in close quarters. It's a small cast, but there's the scene of where they're in the diner and they're talking about just all kinds of shit, and you're getting all these conversations coming at you, but the way the camera is kind of panning is you're getting a perspective and viewpoint of each person in the ensemble cast. So it's very it's really exciting when you see that. And this scene that I'm talking about in Violent Nature has that same kind of vibe of where all of these characters, like, there's a lot of talking and a lot of, like, kind of explanation or exposition about who this monster is essentially in the woods. And it's really, really well shot, really, really well shot. And I thought the information that you're getting makes total sense, and it's actually a really cool explanation of his character, his kind of origins. It's actually pretty scary. It's pretty creepy. It's generally pretty creepy. And the other movie it reminded me a lot of is the iconic opening to The Fog, John Carpenter's The Fog. There is that campfire scene. It reminds me very much of that, where it really has this great setup for the world that you're going to enter. And it was great. It was really good. I was really surprised. And other than that, there's not. There's a lot of long, long scenes in this where there's no dialogue, which is really interesting. Again, all of these long, long, long shots, kind of like real time. And the other thing that's interesting when there is dialogue, like the first half, first two acts or so of this film, there actually is a lot of dialogue, but it's again, it's from the perspective of the killer, and he's kind of coming into where these characters are, to where he's going to, annihilate them. But you hear them talking about different things and this and that from kind of this second, from his viewpoint. So you can hear their dialogue, and you can hear them talking. You can't always make out what they're saying, but you generally can hear their conversations. And I thought that was a real interesting way of handling dialogue, and a new way, and it was really fresh. It was enough to where I found myself kind of really interested in what they were saying, and giving me enough info to where I kind of cared about what was happening on the screen. Um, and the other thing that was surprising is typically, again, a strength of slasher films is the area of suspense. The killer comes out from a place you don't expect, and there's that surprise element. So typically, that is obviously a thing that leads to building that you build, the more and more you build that suspense, the more creative the kills are. If the kills are really creative, the more satisfying of an experience it is. But this movie again is different because it will show the killer actually approaching his victims. And the thing that was surprising was at one point I was like, well, maybe that lets all that creates a space of where there's no suspense, no build up, because you see it in real time happening. But what I was surprised about, and plus it's a lot of the scenes are in daylight, the thing that I found was that it still had a lot of intensity to it. It almost had this, in certain scenes, it almost had a little extra because you're like seeing these 2 points come together, and you know that these people are going to be like completely fucking destroyed, and you're like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, and then it happens. So in some ways, it kind of worked, which typically it wouldn't really work, or create that extra tension that's needed for those kinds of setups. It's very interesting. The other thing is there's barely any music in this movie. There's like these occasional little kind of sounds or vignettes of music that are more like on the that are kind of these ambient sounds, or like these droning kind of sounds. But the use of that is really, really effective. And again, the you're really hearing and getting the sight and sound of the woods. The woods is like a giant character in this movie. And again, like I said, atmosphere is my biggest thing for a movie. This movie really creates a really cool atmosphere. And again, it's really, and it's interesting because it's really slow. There's moments of where it's really, really, really slow, but I don't think it dragged. I was into it. I've heard some people say that this movie is like a relaxing movie, like kind of meditative, but it's a brutal fucking slasher movie, which again is something you never hear. You never equate those two things together, and it's pretty funny. But I kind of agree with that view or that assessment. I feel like it's kind of a soothing movie in a really horrific way. Very cool. I was really surprised, and even even say in the case like if this film didn't really work, or it wasn't very good, or this or that, which I don't think. In this case, I actually really like this movie. Um, Even in that worst case scenario, I think the originality of how this movie was shot and the way this story was told is so commendable because I really feel like they really tried to do something different and unique. Because yeah, slashers are they fit a certain template, so that they are very much a formulaic. Um, there's a very formulaic system to creating a good slasher movie, and it works. For the most part, it's a great blueprint. But it's also very very hard to kind of break out of that, to kind of do something really creative or take something in a different direction, because a lot of the times that can be done, but then it's not really a slasher movie anymore. So it's a fine line. But I thought this film does something very very cool and does do something legitimately different. And again, I said, well, even if this film isn't good or wasn't very good, it is. It needs. It's. It needs props. They need the respect that they at least try something really really different. But I actually really like this movie. I thought it was really really cool. So I'm really. I think I'm gonna look the next time I'm out to buy some movies. I am going to look for this movie. So thanks again, and check this movie out if you get a chance. Peace.